Hi, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Pellavita. I'll be your moderator today. And what we're going to be discussing will be a very interesting rule that they're promulgating in our great country in Washington, D.C. And this is called the Department of Labor Fiduciary Standard, which is basically a disguised attempt to get rid of people that sell financial products and get compensated from their own companies. Like, no kidding. So I went to Washington, D.C. First time I did this to testify last week in front of the Department of Labor to explain to them a very interesting phenomenon. Once they did this, retirement plans in this country dropped 40%. Really what happened, whether they know it or not, the financial advisors quit. They just quit setting up retirement plans. They said, this is a bad idea. But here's another bad idea. Let me show you what the fiduciary rule was. I had to read through it on a train up to Washington, D.C. There it is. That's one rule promulgated by Washington. And I had to explain to them, because they lied in their fact sheet, that $5 billion was lost in fixed annuities. If you have a fixed annuity, no commissions are taken out of your account. If you have an equity index annuity, no commissions are taken. I know this only because I've worked in the industry for nearly 40 years now. And I've worked with financial advisors around the country for nearly 40 years and wrote an article for the Journal of Accountancy saying on fixed equity index annuities, they're like CDs. Nothing is taken out of the client's account. The accountants didn't know. And what they had to do is do a fact check on it. And they go, oh, you're right. Okay. So with this fiduciary standard, which says that purportedly all the advisors have to operate in the best interest of their employees, should we adopt a fiduciary standard in Washington, D.C.? In other words, if it's good for everybody else, maybe it's good for them. So because I don't think they're operating in the best interest of the American public. With that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. And yes, I did bring up, David, the $34 trillion in debt. That should be the first thing on their deck, not a crazy another rule by the rule mongers. So I brought it up. By the way, I made no friends. David, I absolutely made no friends. In the Q&A session, they totally ignored me. Totally. They ran over to somebody who was doing a fiduciary rule for alternative investments and saying, how can we craft the rule to make it work for alternative investments? And then finally they said, any questions? I said, yes, I have a question. Have you done a study to see the last time you did this, that retirement plans dropped 40%? Oh, no, we didn't have a study. And by the way, time's out. That's how I got treated. It was like, hey, if you're going to tell these clowns in Washington the bad news and be in their face, they'll either A, ignore you, B, push you out of the way, but they're not going to address that $34 trillion in debt that you're talking about. But hey, look, at my age, why do I care? I'm not looking for a job from one of their hacks. I could care less. I'm just hoping not to die next year, So when you get older, frankly, you just don't care. So, but I do care the fact that the $34 trillion in debt and AARP keeps going, oh, we're going to maintain Social Security. No, you're not. The numbers don't make sense. And you're not doing anything about it. Social Security will go down the toilet. Same with Medicare. Medicare will go down the toilet by the time we're done with this program. And David, these people are blind. Then I took a train to New York and got to deal with some real people, which is pretty good. These people are idiots.
Let me mention a couple of things. Okay. First, in addition to being the former Comptroller General of the United States, as you probably know, I'm the former Assistant Secretary of Labor for Pension and Welfare Benefit Programs, which is ERISA, which I assume is the group that you were testifying before, the Employee Benefit Security Administration.
Yeah, it was the Employee Benefit Security Administration.
And so I guess the first question that I would have for you is, what specifically did you recommend? All right. And then the second question that I would have is, did the issue of risk associated with annuities come up? Because I think that is a serious issue. I'm not talking about compensation.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the fact that you cannot rely on the credit rating agencies to really assess risk for retirement annuities, because their horizon is so short, and given the significance, the amount, the time frame in which people would be relying upon these payments.
Okay. First of all, you have to distinguish between variable annuities,
Yes.
which is security, and it falls under the jurisdiction of the SEC. It is nothing that we ever put in our pension plans. And then fixed and equity index annuities, which are governed under state law, and they're basically CDs offered by the insurance company. Now, the variable annuities are a whole different cat. Their fees, commissions taken out. They're the wild, wild west. We don't use them. Fixed and equity index annuities are they're solid investments. We even used them in our retirement plan. They're like CDs in a bank. Now, you did bring up another risk, and that's the risk of what happens if the insurance company go under. I know one company that I worked for went under. It cost me about $800,000 when I was a youngster. Didn't know that insurance companies could go under, didn't know all my renewals would be stripped from me. But I learned a lesson from Mutual Benefit Life back in when I was my 30s. Oh, okay. With that, it can go under. Now, how do you protect that? Every state has a state insurance guarantee fund, similar to the FDIC. Most of them cover $250,000, $300,000, except California, 80% up to $100,000. It's the worst. The best, New York and Washington, $1 million. You can buy $1 million of annuities and have it covered. So if you have a product, which they do, that has a guarantee they're not going to lose money, an upside, how do the insurance companies make money? They don't the first year. As a matter of fact, it takes a while for them to actually make their money back. So they tack on surrender charges because they do pay the producer. They don't take anything out of your account. They credit you interest and they lose money, like no kidding. As a matter of fact, some of them during the low interest rate environment called us and say, we have a goal this year. I said, what's the goal? Don't sell any of our annuities, okay? Because we can't make any money. They actually lose money the first year. How do they make it back? It's the surrender charge. If you keep the money with them long enough, and usually the surrender charges are much longer than in a CD. They're 6, 7, 8, some are even 10 years. That's how they make their money. Now let's look at the commissions, okay? Then I'm gonna pick on the fee. Now, I've only worked with these people for 40 years. So when you work with people for 40 years, you know a lot about it. Okay, commissions. I'm going to pick the fee advisors who are attacking it and the annuity advisors. The fee advisors say, hey, we only charge 1% on your assets under management. Sometimes they charge 2, sometimes they charge a half a point, but let's say they average 1%. Over a 10-year period, they'll collect 10% of your assets. If they go up, they collect more. If they go down, in this.
You're freezing up. You froze. I can't hear you, Nick.
They don't tell you they make money when you lose money.
Yeah, you're frozen, and you froze up for about 30 seconds.
I know. I was going to say, I think the fee-based people. By the way, it's the fee-based people are behind this. What they want to do is eliminate competition in their market. So I'm going to attack their underbelly because I know this.
Kind of like the Democrats and Republicans. They want to eliminate the third option.
Get rid of these guys that are getting paid by the insurance company. You just have them be the only advisors. But here's one of their underbellies. If you have $1 million, they lose 100,000. They still make 9,000 on 1%. In other words, just because they lost money don't mean that they didn't make money. So over that 10-year period, they're going to make 10%. The annuity commissions average about 5%. Okay, and they pay the GA, the rent, they pay everything out of it, but it's a one-time charge. In other words, you get paid up front. That's it. You don't get paid again. Okay, so for the next 10 years, as money stays with the insurance company, they amortize that 5% over 10 years and say, okay, it's a half of 1% is what they're paying out in commissions, literally. The fee-based guy got 10%. Now, over what has really happened in this market, from 2000 to 2010, the annuities beat the S&P 500. But you'll never hear a financial advisor say that. Do you know why? It's not in their interest. As they want to take your money and put a wrap fee on it. They hate annuities because they can't put their wrap fee on it. That's the truth. Okay. So but then from 2010 to 2020, the S&P 500 creamed the annuities. Now we're at 2020, 2030. We don't know. So most of the clients we work with, we diversify because no one knows what the future is. All right. Now, with that crazy rule that they're spending all this time with, wouldn't it be nice, David, if they spent time looking at their national debt and reducing it, balancing the budget, which my QDOS analysis show you need to reduce every department 28%. Okay, which means you got to take reductions 9% each year for the next 3 or 4 years, and you'll actually balance the budget. But they're not even interested in hearing that, and it just drives me nuts. But yeah, and then to make matters worse, I went up to Carnegie Hall, which is part of the reason I went there, to go see a nice, beautiful dueling pianos. When I flipped through the Carnegie Hall program, guess what? Housing and Urban Development gave Carnegie Hall $1 million. Now, what's bad about that? We had to borrow the money. We had to borrow the money to give Carnegie Hall, that's supported by millionaires and billionaires, $1 million. Why did we do that? It's just another government waste, my friend. You know, they have no
What
business.
does HUD have to do with that anyway?
You told me
Housing and urban development, is that what you're saying? Housing and urban development is giving money to Carnegie Hall?
It's in their program. Carnegie Hall was given $1 million by HUD. We can bring the other panelists in. It drove me crazy because this is the type of trash that goes on in Washington, D.C. all the time. I know Rick has been waiting with his hand up, so maybe he has some comments.
So the underlying theme to all of this is that people are mathematically undereducated about financial math. That, like, there's a reason that car dealers like leasing cars, because it involves more numbers than just selling a car. And the more numbers involved, the more hocus pocus can go on. And there's just a lot of numbers with finance and economics, and individual consumers don't understand it. And I would guess that most of the members of Congress don't have the necessary level of mathematical sophistication to make good judgments, to become an actuary, to have the level of experience that you have, Nick, and you have, David. You have to go to school for years. It's the most an actuary makes mathematical decisions for an insurance company. You have to be certified by taking a brutal series of 10 exams to be qualified to. And now it's even worse because it's all computer driven, and there's just a lot of numbers, and nobody understands the numbers, which means that everybody makes bad decisions.
But Rick, okay, I've had 2 full-time enrolled actuaries working for me, and you're right. They have to really pass exams that are harder than the CFA, harder than the bar, harder than the CPA exam. It takes them usually 10 years to pass these crazy exams. But since you're a Mega Society member, you'll appreciate this. The math is basic math. It is not calculus. It's not doing Mobius strip calculations. It is really very, very basic math. Actual science isn't rocket science by any stretch of the imagination. ERISA, sorry to say it, David, they made it overly complicated. In other words, I tell people when I teach at Northeastern University, ERISA is complicated and built to stay that way, so it protects my job and your job. It's not there to benefit people. I mean, you know, and why would you have a rule, just one rule, that's this big? You know, I mean, it's what they do up there is absolutely crazy. But yeah, we do need better fiduciary. We do need better financial literacy.
Well, that's the bottom line. What we're talking about here is financial literacy. We only have 14 states that require financial literacy in order to be able to graduate from high school. It ought to be 50 plus DC. It's one of the fundamental failures in our K through 12 education system. And we've got too many people that are following the bad example of the federal government, spending more money than they make, charging it to the credit card, and they'll ultimately have a day of reckoning, if you will. But I think, candidly, I'm a certified public accountant, so obviously I know more about statistics and math and some of these issues than most people. I personally believe that the actuarial exams, and you have 2 different levels. You have a fellow of the Society of Actuaries, and you have an associate of the Society of Actuaries. That's very different than enrolled actuaries. Enrolled actuaries have to do with the IRS, and it's not as difficult to become an enrolled actuary as it is a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. My personal view is that is the most difficult and complex certification to get. Is an FSA. But coming back to what Rick said and what you said, Nick. I mean, the fact is that we're talking about fundamental math here. I mean, we're not talking about anything that's very complicated. And I've said many times that there's a new 4-letter word in federal fiscal policy. It's called math, and most of the elected representatives would fail that exam.
Right. Yeah, and that's part of the problem I had when I was talking to them. I did put another thing through there. I asked them a simple question: how many of them, the people that work at the Department of Labor, EBSA, how many have managed set up more than 5 retirement plans? How many do you think?
0.
In other words, small retirement plans.
0.
Okay, so they never met with a client, a small businessman. They never went through all the Now, I've set up hundreds of them over 22 years. Okay. But I believe the people in the ESBA, they have nobody in there that have set up even 5 retirement plans and met with 5 clients, small businesses, as to what their concerns are. So here you have a group that's promulgating a rule like this that isn't really qualified to even promulgate a rule. Because they were
hear you. No, I know.
They were never in the trenches. Yeah. They never listened.
We're on the front lines.
Yeah,
but,
right.
But in fairness, that exists in large aspects of the federal government, and it also exists, not just in the executive branch, but in the legislative branch as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, what they don't also understand the result is because I work with the financial advisors. When they see this thrown in front of them, what they do is they quit and they say, okay, retirement plans aren't good for you. Let's talk about doing some other investments. Seriously, that's what they do. And they move on because
you make an important point that all annuities are not equal.
And all
insurance companies, there are 3 kinds of insurance companies. There's stock, there's mutual, and there's they're fraternal. They're very different. People also don't understand that there are limits on the guarantees, depending upon which type you are. And furthermore, they don't understand the difference between a retirement annuity and an investment annuity, okay? Because a lot of people end up, use them, for investments, if you will, and not for retirement income. And they're fundamentally different. And the horizon is fundamentally different. Last thing I'll say on this, and then we can get into the broader topic about the government, is as a whole, and not leading by example, is one of the things I found when I went to the rating agencies back when I was Comptroller General, and I was concerned about the poor job that they were doing in connection with government credit evaluation. I also was concerned about insurance company credit evaluation. And one of the things that I found was that I was told by more than one major rating agency that they only look out 5 to 7 years. And they basically say, can you end up meeting your obligations for the next 5 to 7 years? Well, as you know, when you look at, a government, and when you read the financial statements, whether it be the federal government, state government, or many local governments, they've got huge unfunded obligations that only get worse with the passage of time, and they may not come to fruition until beyond that 5 to 7 year horizon, and therefore they're not within the scope of what these entities are looking at. Okay, you've got the same thing with regard to insurance companies, to the extent that you're talking about retirement annuities, where you're counting on a stream of income over many years, and now you find that you've got a lot of private equity firms that are buying up a lot of stock companies, okay, and engaging in a range of creative practices with reinsurance and investments. And as you know, the SEC recently announced that you can't rely solely on rating agencies for determining risk. And I think one of the things that really has to happen is we've got to take a lot harder look at the degree of transparency, what's going on with regard to reinsurance, and what's going on higher risk investments as compared to surplus rather than as compared to total assets, in really assessing risk for insurance companies, especially when you're dealing with retirement annuities.
Yeah. By the way, one big danger you just pointed out, and the American public doesn't even know it, is what you just said. Private equity companies are buying stock insurance companies in the United States. Now, this is my opinion because I've worked with the private equity people. This is really bad for the American consumer because there's nobody I've worked with in private industry that just wasn't greedy as a hawk, David. And one place that you can dismantle huge amounts of assets and put them in your pocket is insurance companies. When we had the mutual company structure, it was okay because oddly enough, if you're an insurance holder, policy holder, you're basically the shareholder of that company. Now that they demutualize and have stock companies, you can have Chinese private equity groups come in and own the insurance companies, which have asset piles up the gazoo, dismantle them. And this could be really, really bad for the American.
They come in, they hollow them out, they suck all the value out, and they leave an empty shell.
Yeah, exactly. Or they load it up with debt, and then they put out huge salaries to themselves, and they leave an empty shell. It's dangerous. There's absolutely no question. A recent acquisition I'm familiar with, a company we've used for 20 years, it was owned by the Moody family, a nice multi-billion-dollar, multi-generation family in Houston, and Galveston, Texas. They sold out to a private equity firm. And I'm sitting there just stunned because I'm going, do you know that this could be really bad for all the policyholders? And no alarm bells went off around the United States. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. It's like, I think 30 or 40 billion in assets. And alarm bells went off on my head. I was going like, I've worked with private equity guys. They're not walking in the door to here to help you. It's like an IRS agent. They walk in your door and say, hi, I'm from the IRS. I'm here to help you. No, they're not. If a private equity guy comes in and takes over your company, hi, I'm here to help the company. No, you're not.
Well,
that's how millions and millions of people lost their pensions. These these old companies, 100-year-old companies that had tens of billions in their pension funds, which you need. The private equity companies came in and they sucked all the money out of there, and the pensions disappeared.
Right. Well, my point, Nick, is that one of the things that I brought up with the current Assistant Secretary of Labor in a speech that I gave recently, she and I were the keynote speakers, was Lisa they really Gomez? Needed. Pardon me?
Was that Lisa Gomez?
Yeah. The current Assistant Secretary of Labor.
Yeah, Lisa Gomez.
Right. Yeah. Right. Correct. She was a keynote. I was a keynote at a big ERISA conference, if you will. And the point that I made is they need to recognize this reality as the SEC has and really have more guidance with regard to fiduciary responsibility in connection with annuitizing pension obligations, because it's going on big time. Right. It's going on big time right now, and it's going to get to be a bigger issue as time passes. So you want to transition now to the federal government, and I can set up a couple of things to begin with. Okay,
yeah, that to me is the biggest issue in the country right now, and everybody's ignoring it. I'm sorry, that $33 trillion in debt, that's what AARP is relying on to pay Social Security and Medicare. David, ain't going to happen. When they go knock on the doors of the federal government to support Medicare, they're going to come back with, we're broke, like they're doing right now in the Ukraine-Russia war.
All right, well, let's unbundle this a little bit, okay? First, let's talk about fiduciary standard, which is basically a fiduciary is a position of trust. You have a duty of loyalty, to a person or institution or whatever, to act in their best interest. I can tell you, as you know, that I used to be a trustee of Social Security and Medicare, one of two public trustees. The others are all cabinet secretaries in the current administration, whichever administration that might be. One of the first questions that I asked before I accepted the presidential appointment to be one of the two public trustees is, would I be deemed to be a fiduciary? And the answer was no. And the reason being is I wasn't concerned about how I would act. I wasn't concerned with regard to how my fellow public trustee would act. But I know when you've got a bunch of politicians involved, then that is a high risk endeavor. In addition to that, as you probably know, under the Social Security Medicare system, under current law, any surplus that exists, and for years we were taking in more than we were paying out, so we were generating a surplus, had to be invested in U.S. Treasury securities or other securities that were backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. So you didn't have an option as to what you could do to create a diversified portfolio that might create a higher risk related return. We're in an opposite situation now. We're paying out more than we're taking in. And the trust funds will go down to zero at different dates in the future. And contrary to what some would tell you, the only way you can pay benefits for Social Security is through the trust fund, not through general revenues. And therefore, benefits will be cut 20% across the board and increasing within 10 years if we don't reform the program, which is obviously something we need to do sooner rather than later. But let me make a couple of more points and then we'll open it up. I mean, the way I've always looked at life is you've got three levels of behavior. You've got legal, you've got ethical, and you've got moral. The floor or the lowest standard is legal. And therefore, whenever I deal with somebody who says it's not illegal, it's not somebody I want to deal with. All right. The next higher standard is ethical. Right. It may or may not be legal, but it's not ethical. All right. And the highest is moral. All right. Now let's go back to the preamble of the Constitution. And if you look at the preamble of the Constitution and you look at which was the founder's intent, if you look at what the federal government's doing as compared to the preamble of the Constitution, it's totally out of whack. But there's a key word in that preamble that I'll mention right now that relates to our topic. It's called posterity. That we're supposed to be acting not just for today, but to help create a better tomorrow. And posterity, by definition, means what's the impact of what you're doing on future generations. Another word that I use a lot is stewardship, which is not just leaving things better off when you leave than when you came, but better position for the future. The issue that you talked about, the mounting debt burdens. And by the way, the 34 trillion is just the tip of the iceberg, because you have to add the unfunded obligations with Social Security, Medicare, military civilian pensions, retiree health care, et cetera. The real number's 125 to 130 trillion. That's the real number, okay? And it's growing faster than the economy. So my point is that we're being irresponsible, we're being unethical, we're being immoral. So whether or not there's a fiduciary standard which applies to the government, which it clearly doesn't, okay? And don't hold your breath if you think that they're going to enact one, if you will. We clearly are violating the others. We're clearly mortgaging the future of our kids, grandkids, and future generations. And that's irresponsible, unethical, immoral, and it needs to stop. It's one of the things that I continue to fight for every day, is to be able to change course and try to help provide a reasonable assurance that our future will be better than our past, because on the path we're on right now, it won't be.
Oh, good. Yes, Kim.
I'll let you moderate, Nick.
Yeah, well, Kim's up. So.
Hello, David. Thank you for mentioning that. All too often, I'm always hearing, you might be right, but you're not politically correct. I always try to take that moral road, but I don't think we're really given an opportunity or taught to drive home that morality, because it's always about what's legal. I mean, all too often I'll sit in a court case or a hearing and it's all about what's legal, not about what's moral. And I think we left that a long time ago, and it's hard to bring it back when all you're fighting is just to survive. And to survive is what's legal, not what's moral. I think we need to get back down to our roots. And I don't know what the reset button is anymore, because all too often I will get out there and try to do things, but I'm not politically correct. So, if you're not politically correct and you can't get ahead in the game, then there's nothing left. So I agree with you, David, 100%, but I don't think this debt problem we have has anything to do with even being politically correct. I think there's a lot of corruption. And Nick brought something up that he visited Carnegie Hall the other day and saw donations made by, and then I went and looked, and, the housing development, the state, the New York State donates $20 million. The housing development, $1 million. And these people are given seats based on their donation. And I'd like to know, why are they donating so much money? I mean, I understand the Arts Center has to have some money funding through it, but that's a lot of money. And I would like to know who's sitting in those seats.
I just want to say, David, you've brought up some really good points. I have to leave early, but I tell you, it's just really concerning that we're in this kind of an economic situation. And I think that, we are, I think sometimes very short-sighted, that we can keep printing money, we can keep incurring these kind of debts. But I think we do so at a cost for passing the debt on to our children and grandchildren, but also the cost of doing business, right? I mean, recently I was at a venture capital summit here in North Carolina, and it's harder to get money when you're looking at 5.5% interest rate than when we had 1% interest rates, which was really driving more innovation in our economy. So if capital dries up, people can't fund their companies, then they're probably going to go to other parts of the world to do that. And I think it's a significant concern that we don't talk enough about, because so much of the eye on the ball is on the divisive politics of Washington and the elections and disruption everywhere we go, right? So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
This discussion is part of an argument that's been going on for a century, where the people who say you achieve prosperity through austerity, and the people on the other side say you spend your way to prosperity, the Keynesians, Obama added $8 trillion to the debt, spending our way out of the crash of 07-08, which was Trump added the same another $8 trillion, with tax cuts. And Biden has added $2 trillion so far. And the infrastructure bill adds, I think, a couple trillion every year for the next 10 years. And another thing on the horizon is, when you talk about Social Security and Medicare, is that new medicine means that people won't be dying until they're 100 and more. And so that means that people who retire at 67 or 70, you have to fund them for the next 30 years with new, expensive, crazy medicine, like, growing new livers and kidneys inside genetically engineered pigs. Things are going to get crazier and more science fiction-y, and that adds a whole nother layer to our financial dilemma.
Yeah, Jatovi.
I think both Rick and Kim are spot on this, because it's a tie-in of that morality, because there is a lot of corruption throughout this whole system. But then we have to figure out our priorities, because as Rick brought up, okay, where's our money going to really be spent, and what's going to be most beneficial for the individuals in our society? We're getting older. We're going to continue spending regardless. And as our society grows, as Rick just pointed out, in terms of the sci-fi ways of things that are coming, in terms of the cloning, the AI self-replicating, which actually just happened. So how are these things, and where is our money going to be best spent? Because just looking at the numbers forgets about the morality of the situation. When everybody becomes a digit, then all it is, okay, well, you cost me money, so you don't deserve this. We've got to get past that and prioritize the morality of life and not the financial side of life, because we forget life itself when it becomes a number.
I want to wish David Walker a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and see you in the new year, okay?
Good to see
Thank
you
you so much.
Take care.
Just really quickly, David, I do have a question for you and everything. But first, I was going to make a statement to something that Kim just said, because I was actually talking to one of my bosses, as y'all can see, I'm at the Cultural Arts Center that I work at. And one of the hardest things to get funding for isn't so much the donors, but we have a difficult time, and I'm sure even you can relate to this, David, as a cultural arts center, with operational costs. That's where a lot of nonprofits have a hard time, is actually getting the cost to pay the staff and to do the day-to-day coverage and all along those lines. So that is something that I don't think enough people pay attention to when they are analyzing the nonprofit world, because that operational cost is oftentimes the thing that is the hardest to deal with. But I had a question for you, David, but go ahead if you had any thoughts
let
around
me
that.
respond to a couple of things. First, the deficits for the first 3 fiscal years on which Biden has been president are about $6 trillion. So it's a lot higher, Rick, than what you said. But you're correct to say that the infrastructure bill will end up adding amounts in the future. That's just for the 3 years that he's been in. Secondly, I've done extensive analysis with regard to fiscal and monetary issues. And when you graph the thing, you find out that the greatest increase in debt to GDP occurred during Obama's administration. It's really not even close. I mean, I was frankly surprised by that. And things have really spun out of control since 2008. And the only thing I know that happened in 2008 is I left as Comptroller General. So correlation is not causation, but it's shocking. The other thing is that, you know, one of the things that we have to do 3 levels of activity at the government, in my view. We need this fiscal stability commission to be able to engage the American people, set the table for tough choices on spending and revenues and budget controls, to be able to get debt to GDP down to a reasonable and sustainable level within the next 10 years or so. That's the first thing we have to do. The second thing we have to do is we have to have a conversation about what the federal government should do, how it should do it, who should do it, how we measure success. Because the federal government has turned into a bloated bureaucracy. It's doing many things that are not envisioned by the founders. It doesn't have a plan. It measures success based upon how much money it spends and how many people it has, rather than what outcomes are achieved. All right. And so we need some type of a grace commission on steroids to be able to take a look at that and to make recommendations to Congress and the president for them to be able to consider how best to accomplish the federal government's objectives, including additional reorganization authority for the president to deal with some of the issues that we've talked about over the last several weeks, where you got a lot of people on the playing field, but many of them are doing things they're not even authorized to do, or there's duplication, or they're working at cross purposes. Many things should be done by the state or local government rather than the federal government, which are closer to the people and more accountable to the people, if you will. And then the third thing is we continue to work on things that deal with people, process, technology for economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. But the fact is, the big numbers in number 1 and number 2. We're now starting to talk about number 1. There are bipartisan bills to create that type commission. Hopefully they'll happen soon. But we're not talking about number 2. And number 2 is a great deal of what we've been talking about over the last several weeks that has to be focused on. Thank you.
And the quick question I have for you, and that's what I was getting ready to, I'm going to make that comment about the notion of definitely the resources and everything. But I saw 2 things in the news that I was curious to your thoughts about, because I know a lot of times we think about the impact of a foreign business and everything, as well as the impact of unions, David. And I did see that Japan's Nippon Steel just bought U.S. Steel for $14.9 billion, and that a Tesla rival, NIO, secured a $2.2 billion investment from Abu Dhabi fund and everything. And then I also saw where there's this strike going on that the Teamsters authorized against Anheuser-Busch. So I was just wondering, David, your thoughts around the importance of the unions and the importance of this foreign money coming into our economy and all along those lines. And should we be concerned about such deals as the 2 that I just mentioned?
Well, we're in a global economy. And what you're talking about is an example of that fact. I own some U.S. Steel stock. I'll have to look and see whether or not it's time to sell now that you just told me. I mean, one of the reasons I bought it is because I thought they were going to be taken over. I don't know when that got announced, but that's news to me. I think let me come back to something you mentioned before. I've run two not-for-profits.
Right.
And I agree with you that it's difficult to be able to get people to contribute to try to defray operating costs.
Right.
Because when people want to give money, they want to be associated with something new and something different, right? You know, an initiative,
Right.
you know, a new exhibit,
Right.
something that in many cases they like their name to be associated with. And they don't necessarily want their name associated with overhead, right, or what they perceive to be overhead, right? So that is a challenge, but you need to have reasonable operating expenses as well. So look, I mean, that's just recognizing, Mark, the fact that we're in a global economy, and that there are other countries out there that have significant resources that they can bring to bear. The question is what are we doing to be more strategic with regard to our activities, both domestically and internationally? And the challenge that I have with that is the U.S. government to this day still does not have a forward-looking, outcome-based, resource-constrained, strategic plan to try to maximize our economic potential, our diplomatic influence, our military capabilities. We don't have one. And what people will tell you our strategic plan is the budget. It's a one-year document that we've only passed on time and appropriations 4 times in 72 years. So we've got a lot of fundamental work that needs to be done.
The U.S. Steel acquisition was announced 4 hours ago, David. So,
well, there you go. Well, that's why
that's usually don't know anything about it.
I felt it was going to get acquired. I just didn't know when and by whom.
All right.
So
It's the journalist in me, Dave. I'm studying stuff constantly.
David has a plan to get the U.S. back on an even keel, and we don't know if it'll get implemented or to what extent. But in the past, and maybe in the future, we've been lucky enough to have our asses saved by growth. McKinsey says that AI may double the world's GDP, the tech wave associated with the singularity. And in that case, that level of growth may buy us some more time, even if we half-assed our financial, planning. That's thing one. Thing two is Kim asked, where did all the corruption come from? And what we've seen over the past 40 years is the rise of the psychopath in business and government. Elon Musk, psychopath. Trump, psychopath. Private equity firms run by psychos. It's an institutionalized selfishness that existed less in the 50s, when even a lot of big companies were kind of overgrown mom and pop operations where the CEOs knew the workers. And the private equity is just, you bring in all these hired guns to suck value out of everything, who don't give a crap about the workers.
Well, that's your view, Rick. And I will say that that we have a lot higher percentage of people that are motivated by money to excess, and I do think that that there is a growing gap between the haves and have-nots in this country, and I do agree that AI is going to provide an opportunity for significant additional economic growth. But I don't believe that everybody's going to benefit equally from the impact of AI, and that could end up further complicating the growing gap between the haves and the have-nots, which can create domestic tranquility challenges for us.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to be really bad in 50 years when some people get to live essentially forever because they have the resources to buy new organs and to and then other people, the have-nots, are dying at 70 and 80, as people have always died.
Yeah.
Hey, David, just really quickly, Because I've always wondered this, and I don't know the answer, but I just saw recently, I think it was on Friday, that they are saying that the unemployment rate is going to rise in 2024, and that there are going to be several million folks that will lose their jobs. But when I hear numbers like 3.9% going up to 4.4%, that doesn't really seem all that bad, because that means that at least 95% are actually working and everything. So what is the acceptable amount of unemployment? And I am not an economist, don't have the kind of background that you do, David, and everything, but what is considered acceptable? Because like when I saw that article, I'm seeing all these figures where people are concerned about these millions losing their jobs, and I definitely understand that need to want to be concerned about our fellow man. But I was just wondering,
I don't think there's a specific number that is universal with regard to the definition of full employment, but I think you need to. Right now, unemployment level is about 3.7%,
right.
But we're still in a situation where there are many more job openings than there are people looking for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of that has to do with several factors. Number one, the skills gaps between what do we need and what do people have, and part of that comes back to the education system. Part of that comes back to training. Part of that comes back to the immigration system. Okay, a mismatch, if you will, and part of that has to do with the fact that you're not even counted as being unemployed unless you're actively seeking employment. Well, in some cases, the federal government was providing so much assistance as a result of COVID that people, it was better for people to not go work because they got a lot of benefits that were tax-free, rather than to go work. So, look, I mean, we don't have an unemployment problem right now, but we have an increasing challenge because of the difference between what type of skills and knowledge are we going to need versus what do we have available to us through the current population and based upon immigration policy. And then, as Rick said, and then I'll turn it over after this, AI is going to have a positive and negative impact. Okay, it's going to have a positive impact from a macro standpoint, but it's going to have a very different impacts from a micro impact, meaning with regard to individuals. Some will be benefited from it, and some won't be. Yeah.
AI has created a bunch of new kind of crappy, tech has created a bunch of new crappy jobs. Uber driver, crappy job. A lot of work that seems like you're making money, but you're kind of not. You don't get benefits. That's tech.
Well, actually, Rick, it seems to me the people at the top of the Uber did really well. The person who was on our show, John Fanning, who was a founder of Napster, him and his nephew, they invested in Uber. Okay, so I had lunch with John. He was one of the ones on Money Masters. And he goes, we got to have lunch at Las Vegas. I said, what happening, John? I'm going to make a lot of money. I said, on what? We invested in Uber. And okay, so how much can you make? 140 million. And I thought John was pulling my leg, right? Then the 12 came out, which is the report from the SEC, the top money makers on Uber. And guess what? He put in 25,000 and he pulled out $144 million. Okay. John Fanning and Sean Fanning won the lottery, not on Napster because it went under, but on Uber. So he makes 144 million. How are the Uber drivers doing? I rest my case, counselor.
I want to add something that people overlook greatly about artificial intelligence. When we really started driving this home many years ago and creating big super computers to work with it, it was not intended to replace humans, okay? Artificial intelligence is nothing more than what we collect, data we collect, and it was intended to improve the quality of life we have, to improve our jobs, okay, but not replace humans. You cannot replace the human factor in any sort of way. And it is being made stupid now because people are not thinking and utilizing HI to implement the AI we have today. And all too often, I'm dealing with customer service now ran totally by AI, and they have no idea what they're talking about. I spend an hour trying to get past the AI to get to a human, that I end up eventually just contacting the executives and saying, what on earth have you designed here? Who designed this? So we got to stop taking away jobs. And I get shot down every time I do this little speech or lecture of, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. We need to cut corners. Every time you cut corners, you make our lives worse. Okay. HI is more important than AI, and we need to re-involve it. And we need to get back to the basics of human intelligence and let AI become what it was intended to be. And that was just to improve our quality of life and make our jobs easier and more efficient, but not to replace us.
Kim, the key word is representative. Just say representative. But Jacoby's had his hand up here.
Right.
Okay.
Just to touch on the AI thing, because this kind of ties in, there are two things that I wanted to, one, I'll touch on the AI, and the second thing is something I'm curious about from you, Dave. But the first thing with AI, that's the gaming world. That's the whole programming, coding, and all that. That's the gaming world. It's been there forever. It's been utilized, and it's now hitting reality more so than people are used to. But as a gamer, we've seen AI and we know where it's going. And speaking of, that's one of the things that I shared in the chat, talking about how AI has now crossed over the hurdle of self-replication. So now it's self-replicating and actually improving upon itself. That is something that they talked about with Skynet and the Terminator and everything else. So it's coming down the pipe, and it's going to change a lot of things. One of the also things that Rick, and this all ties together, what Rick was talking about in terms of how tech is kind of messing with things. Again, there is something big that could be the canary in the coal mine that came out of the gaming world, because a lot of this stuff in the future is coming there. Right now, for example, AI being used to create different games. But right now, Epic Games created what's called a gaming engine. That gaming engine is what most gamers use, or most developers use, to create games. And just like AI, what Dave, you were talking about, how AI can sometimes help out and sometimes hurt. This is what the gaming engine is, the canary in the coal mine. So there was a developer who just recently hired people from across the globe, and they bought different packages. So with this gaming engine, you're able to, you have different assets that you can throw into an actual world and create a game. And it makes it easy for people like us, just to create, the layman, to create a game. And so this developer did that. It's a developer called Fantastic. They created a game. It started in 2019. It became one of the most hyped games to get released by 2021. It was on the list. It became advertised. Actually, it's Fantastic with no A at the beginning. It's FN-tastic. But so they got the hype behind it. Everybody was wanting this in the gaming world. Then it got delayed. They had put out these marketing videos. Everybody fell in love with it. And what they showed in these videos, when they released it, finally, about 2 weeks ago, well, actually a week and a half ago, it got released. It was nothing as they put out there in the advertising, which all these packages they purchased. So there are about 200 packages they put together in this thing, just like any layman can do. And it became so hyped. And then what they ended up doing is, once you purchase the game online, you have to hold, if you hold it past 2 hours, you can't ask for a return. So they get your money. 4 days later, after releasing this game and getting tons of people to purchase this game, they close the studios and they reopen it under a new name. So now they kept the money, cannot be sued because that studio is closed, and now have reopened under a new name. So getting to the whole AI discussion, this is one thing that people are going to do. There are going to be a lot more scammers out there utilizing AI to create these various things that people are going to buy into because people aren't going to understand. Which gets to my question, Dave. With what you're pushing and what we're talking about in terms, going back to what you and Nick were talking about financial literacy and holding up the binder saying this is all to wrap together everything. And we're talking about the debt, the national debt. And yes, we all agree that there's corruption in there. But how do you protect individuals themselves from the actual corruption of the companies? Because we know inflation has gone down, but there are currently companies right now that are using the inflation itself to actually take advantage of people, going back to the scams that people don't really understand. And no matter how much financial literacy you can teach somebody, people still fall for scams. And I don't doubt that everybody in here sees those emails that you get. And if you click on them, you can be financially smart and be financially literate, but you can fall for a scam. So how, in what you're putting together, how do you, I guess, stop the price gouging, protect individuals that are getting taken advantage of? Because we've talked about cutting out these things, but what about the protections that have to be in there?
Well, first, financial literacy is critical, but it's not the only thing that we need to deal with. I mean, part of the issue you're talking about with regard to scams, and scams in many cases, they try to prey on seniors, who may have cognitive challenges, if you will, as they get older in life. I mean, part of it is fairly fundamental, and that is the old story of caveat emptor, buyer beware. I mean, I think there's a lot more going on right now, including by large existing organizations like AARP that are trying to make their members aware of some of these activities, to make them to be more cautious, to do more due diligence. I mean, for example, all of us, I'm sure, get approached from time to time about things, and I will end up doing, let's say, an internet search to try to check out the organization or the individual that's involved. All right. I mean, part of it is helping people understand that you can't take things at face value. You need to do some due diligence or have somebody do it with you. And if you can't do it yourself, get your kids or your grandkids to try to help you do it, because they're more literate with regard to a lot of the technology issues. But you make a good point, Jatovi. I mean, we're always going to have that challenge. And we need to recognize it. We need to figure out what we can do about it. We should have zero tolerance, but it's never going to be zero.
Yeah,
about a third of every issue of the AARP magazine is avoiding scams. We still have a landline, and if I answer the phone, hello, they'll go ahead and they'll make their pitch. But if I answer it, go what? That they hang up.
And with that, we're going to hang up. So we do want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, because we're at time, former Comptroller General of the United States, and all our viewers in the United States and around the world with economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. We'll see you next time.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.